We've all had that experience. We're driving down the road and we see a police officer who's pulled over somebody. We assume it's for speeding, so we check our speedometer and let up on the gas pedal. Well, that's exactly what's happening to American citizens who are living and working in India. India has passed a new law called the Black Money Act, and all of a sudden Americans living in India are thinking, am I in compliance with Indian tax law? Well, this video is for our clients who are living and working in India. We're going to examine what happens when you have two different jurisdictions who think that they both have a right to tax the same amount of earnings. So in this case, it's India and the U.S. And these principles apply also at the state level for the two different states that want to tax or feel like they have a right to tax the same amount of income. So what happens when you have multiple jurisdictions? The same amount of earnings may be taxed twice or not at all. The other thing that happens is each country feels like they're a sovereign country. They don't want their tax rules determined by a third party or a third country. So each country is fastidious about their sovereignty, and they want only their rules to be applied. And of course, they want the revenue that follows that. In the U.S., we have certain things that are called tax benefits. So we don't tax people that have low income. We give them credits, in fact. If you have a mortgage on your primary residence, that's excluded from income. If you have charitable contribution, that's excluded from income. If you have exemptions, or kids, those are excluded from income. If you have standard deductions, that's excluded from income. And there's two benefits that overseas Americans have. One's called the foreign earned income exclusion, and that is excluded from income. Foreign tax credit is the other benefit that overseas Americans can have. So those are some of the unique things that our country has as tax benefits. Even though they're giving these tax benefits, you're still subject to tax on all that income, even if it doesn't result in you writing a check to the federal government. So we all know that there's a difference between the posted speed limit and what's enforced. And that's a critical thing. In some countries, that's a very narrow thing. In other countries, that's a very wide discrepancy or difference. Clients sometimes think, oh, I'm cheap, I don't want to pay for expert advice, I'll just go ask the IRS what is the tax treatment for this type of income. Well, a lot of times with the person that you talk to, either on the phone or if you walk into the IRS office, is not going to be knowledgeable about the tax issues you're facing. And if they're not knowledgeable, there's only one safe answer for a government employee of a Department of Revenue, whether it be the IRS, State Department of Revenue, or Indian Revenue Bureau or Division is, and that is, of course it's taxable. People don't get in trouble at government agencies for saying, yes, it's taxable. They get in trouble for saying, no, it's not taxable, when it actually is. So enforcement mechanism, if India says, we want to see if you pay taxes in the U.S., they might look at a W-2 or FICA, but those aren't really the rules, and that's not how the laws are written. Just so you know, the Black Money Act was really geared towards collecting revenue from wealthy Indians. It is not geared or drafted toward generating revenue from American citizens living and working in India, although it has had the effect of American citizens in India all of a sudden reevaluating what their tax status is. So let's review and talk about what the tax status is of American citizens who are living and working in India. On the top half of this, we have the U.S. side, and the bottom half, we have the Indian side. The question that's trying to be answered here is, where am I a resident? Because in the tax treaty, if you're a resident in the U.S., you get to be taxed by U.S. rules. If you're a resident in India, you get to be taxed by Indian rules. In the U.S., just our normal tax laws, American tax law taxes citizens on their worldwide earnings. This is unusual for most countries. India, like other countries, taxes based upon residency. So this little diagram or row is to try to determine who can tax you. And it does that by asking the question, where are you resident? So the first thing you do, you come down here. If both countries or neither country can make a claim on you, then you go further on down the road. So American citizens working in India, the U.S. is going to make a claim. If they're in India for more than 180 days, India is going to try to make a claim. So in this scenario, under Article 1 of the tax treaty, neither one gets to decide what the final outcome of where you're resident because they both have a claim. So then you go to what's called the tiebreaker rules of Article 4 of the U.S. Tax Treaty. And that tax treaty, you have a question to ask. Do you have a permanent home? If so, where is it? If your permanent home is in India, India is going to try and claim you unless you have a permanent home in the U.S. The next one is habitual abode. If you have a tax home in both or neither, if you have a permanent home in both or neither country, then you go on to the next criteria. You have a habitual abode in the U.S. Do you have a habitual abode in India? If it's both or neither, then you go on to the next one and then allow citizenship to take you. To be the tiebreaker of where you're resident. Where you're a resident gets determined where you're going to be taxed. You're going to be taxed primarily on by U.S. rules or Indian rules. So these are the tax treaty rules. We've talked about why people are reevaluating it. And now let's just go and decide what we need to do about it. The first one is spend less than 729 days in India in a 5-year period, and India is not going to tax you on income that you have from the U.S. or elsewhere. That's one way to avoid the rules. Another is to obtain a permanent U.S. home. If you have a permanent U.S. home, and you don't have a permanent home in India, then the U.S. you're going to be a resident of the U.S. subject to U.S. tax law. So what is a permanent home? Permanent home could be a mailing address, a place where you return to and live. It could be a room and a parent or siblings. If you own real estate in America, that would be a permanent home that you would return to, and it could be a place that you maybe rent out. You probably cannot have a permanent home in India because you have a visa that limits you to how long you can remain in India. If you have a permanent home in both countries or neither country, then you go to a habitual abode. And you can have a habitual abode in both places. A habitual abode is a place where you routinely or habitually sleep. Another way, these are all things of how to minimize India's claim on your source income. Another way to do that is to split your wages between a husband and a wife. And then you can file an Indian non-resident return as a way of putting Indian government on notice that you're not subject to their taxation because you have no Indian source income. So this is what we do to encourage our clients to minimize Indian tax claim. This is a very complicated area of tax law. It's all been brought up by the Black Money Act, which is causing people to reevaluate U.S., not just people, but U.S. citizens living in India to reevaluate their situation. Let us do what we do best, which is evaluate U.S. tax law so that you can do what's best for you and what you're great at. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day. God bless.